Paris, city of love, romance, and dreams. So they say.
Charles Cecil locked in his place in the adventure game Hall of Fame decades ago, but that hasn't quenched his thirst for telling new stories. The creator of the Broken Sword series of adventure games and many other classics such as Beneath a Steel Sky and Lure of the Temptress, Charles's studio Revolution Software has been making games fairly consistently for over 35 years. A big reason this is true is due to the passionate fanbase that has supported modern sequels to these classic franchises. But his journey hasn't always been plain sailing. Hello and welcome to Dear Dwyery, the show where I, Danny O'Dwyer, interview the people behind video games. Charles Cecil is as close as you get to video games royalty, but he's also the type of guy you'd love to spend an evening chatting to in your local pub. So, fair warning, in today's episode the conversation is going to bounce all over the place, from talking about his classic adventure games, to his move to 3D, his lesser celebrated games like In Cold Blood, using Kickstarter to fund new projects, and what to expect from the upcoming 6th Broken Sword, Parsifal's Stone, and their upcoming remaster of the original game in Shadow of the Templars Reforged. And don't worry, if you don't know much about these games, I'll explain as we move along. But first, there are elements of Charles's life that feel like they were ripped out of the script for a Broken Sword game, like how he and his family had to flee their lives in the Democratic Republic of the Congo during a coup d'etat, or how his work has had him talk about game design in every corner of the globe. Or, and I'll let him explain this in his own words, how a local cafe owner convinced him to swim to Alcatraz. So, first of all, you have to tell me about this swim to Alcatraz. Is this a new thing, or have you done this for a while?
Oh, do you know what? I wish I could take all the credit. But actually, now I live in York, and at the bottom of our road, and this is, it is literally a sort of 30-second walk, is this really nice tapas restaurant run by this very sporty woman.
Okay.
And I was eating tapas there with Rolf Saxon, who plays George in Broken Sword. And he'd got his new girlfriend, and we're going, yeah, we should swim from Alcatraz. And that would have been fine. Had not Zoe, the owner, walked past at that moment and said, oh, I'd like to do it too. Anyway, 6 months later, I've got a really, really bad foot and I'm hobbling around. I've seen the most wonderful video of a great white attacking a seal just off the pier. And I'd read it, and it's worse than that, because actually the chances of being attacked by a shark are fairly low. You're much more likely to be attacked by a sea lion. And they're pretty vicious.
Really?
Yes.
It's like swans when you're rowing a boat. You didn't know they were a danger until one started hissing at you.
Well, indeed, and they do, and they go for you because I row, so I can tell you. But but anyway, so 6 months later, I hobble in, feeling very sorry for myself, and Zoe comes bouncing in, long locks of hair, looking fantastic, and says, "So Charles, when are we rowing from Alcatraz?" And I go, "Well, Zoe, I've got a bit of a bad foot, and the sharks are pretty brutal, and the sea lions, and that's before you worry about the currents. Maybe it's not such a good idea." And she said, "Oh, that's such a shame, because I've just come out of hospital having had a mastectomy." And
oh my God. Sympathy out the window for you.
Well, I know. I know. And I said, "Zoe, I'm so sorry." "Oh no," she said, "that's absolutely fine. I'm completely, over it. I've completely reconciled." She said, "And you actually don't need to worry too much, because I'm about to go in hospital for my second mastectomy.
Oh my God.
So you're fine for the next couple of months. Honestly, Charles," she said, "I'm really sorry to hear about your bad foot. But let me ask you again." And she absolutely had me. She is brilliant. She's such a good friend. She talks about, her medical condition all the time, so I'm sure she doesn't mind me talking about it. I know she doesn't mind me talking about it now, but she's brilliant. So we and Kat Shannon, who's an absolute legend when it comes to swimming, she's done PR for various companies, and she came out with us. She climbs Everest and does crazy, crazy things. So we're in very, very good company. So it was about 4 or 5 years ago we did it, and we've been doing it ever since. But I'll tell you, I tried to organise this year, a group of intrepid British swimmers who were going to GDC. And to begin with, he had 10. And then it kind of
Okay.
whittled down to 6, and that was fine. And then it went down to 4. Now, one of them is my son, by the way. So there's 2 of us, plus 2 more. Then somebody else. And at the last moment, there were 2 of us again. So, and can you believe that nobody actually wants to come and join us? I keep asking people, and they keep saying they're going to, and then they keep dropping out.
So where do you launch from? From around where the seals are, presumably. That's the closest.
Oh, yes.
Probable point to Alcatraz.
Yeah. We go from just on the other side of the pier.
Okay.
The main landing point. And the guys that took us out, radioed, and they made sure. And they were telling a story about how a few months earlier they knew that a super tanker was coming through the bay, but there was a thick layer of mist, so you couldn't see it. But they knew it was there because they could see it. And this Coast Guard were telling them. And another boat arrived and dropped about 20 people off who started swimming, and they hadn't checked. And suddenly this super tanker comes out of the mist, and these people are riding bow waves. Now that is dangerous. That really is dangerous.
So presumably there's like a little pilot boat that's kind of with you guys as you're doing it, right?
Yes.
Like along. So, but how long does it take?
Oh, it takes about an hour and a bit. It's not
Okay.
that far. It's only about 2 miles.
Terrifying.
But
to
it's
me.
just great. But what is extraordinary is that it was quite rough last time. But even when it's silky smooth, we would go at a point at which the tide has only just turned and it's flowing out.
Okay.
Because the tide can get very, very fast indeed. But what happens at that point is the huge volume of water is taking the water out of the bay, but the tide has already turned and is coming in. So what you have is millions of tons of water coming one way against millions of tons the other. And so it's sort of smooth up until the point at which the waters are cascading into each other. And there it's very, very rough. You don't want to get caught up in that. That's another thing to avoid.
That's wild. Is it hard to? They talk a lot of the Olympics are on at the moment as we're recording this, and they talk a lot about sort of heavy water or easy water or light water or fast water. Is that when you get into that slushy stuff? Is that where you're just sort of like you're sort of in the soup?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what also happens is that as it comes around, because the tides are very fierce, it'll drag you out, but then you'll have a rip tide coming back up again. You kind of need to know where you are, otherwise you get thrown all over the place. But it's really fun, and Kat, bless her, has promised to do it next year as well. So there's going to be at least 3 of us, plus the other 6 or 7 who say they will, who almost certainly will drop out at the last moment, because they always do.
Well, don't try and add me to the list. I'm not sure. I can just about do the length of a swimming pool, I think, without coming up for air.
You'd be most welcome, Danny.
You're too kind. So GDC, it's not just to come over and swim in the beautiful bay. Have you come to GDC a lot? Has it changed much? What are you there mostly for? Because a lot of people, it's sort of like networking, it's business deals, but it seems like a lot of your work, especially, is sort of like funded through Kickstarters and a passionate core fan base and stuff like that. So what are you over here doing when you're at GDC?
I love GDC. Sometimes it's to go to the lectures. Sometimes it's to give lectures. Sometimes it's just to hang out with, friends. First parties. It's always great to meet, whether it be, Apple or Google or Nintendo or Xbox or whoever. And so that it's a real melting pot. But unlike E3, RIP, unlike E3, which was really very much business based, GDC is much more creative focused, and it's lovely. It's just great to meet like-minded developers. One of the things I think is really exciting and fun to be in with games is that while the television people know that if they get a commission or if their competitor gets a commission, then it's less likely that they will.
Right.
We realize that we are not in a zero-sum game, and particularly adventure developers. If an adventure developer is successful, then that's great because more people are going to come in and they're more likely to buy our game. So we have absolutely no reason not to welcome these people as friends, to help them as much as they can. And sometimes you help them, sometimes they help us. And we have just a wonderful relationship with our fellow developers because we don't see them as competitors. We see them as collaborators.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I've gone through like 2 or 3 different adventure game renaissances over the past 30 years. Like there's been so many different, at the moment there's a documentary being made about Sierra. New Monkey Island came out 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, a new Beneath the Steel Sky came out a couple of years ago.
It did.
It's an extraordinary time to be writing games. Beyond the Steel Sky is super ambitious in that it's taking a full, high-quality console game directly to mobile.
How tricky is it too? Because I can imagine that there is this very tantalizing desire to sit in the world of nostalgia to a certain extent, because you're using characters that you're very familiar with, because you have players who are desperate for a sequel to a series that they've adored, and they're sort of in their hearts they feel like they would be happy to play that game again, even if perhaps that's not actually true in actuality. When they sit down, maybe there are aspects of interface design and things that now they've gotten used to. But when you're sitting down to do a new Broken Sword, for instance, how are you sort of, I guess, approaching it creatively from how much of this is new, how much of this is old?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. At the moment, we're working on 2 projects. We're working on the Broken Sword 1 Reforged and Broken Sword 6 as well. And the approach to both is, I guess, different, except that what we're trying to do is redefine what the new generation of adventure should be. Broadly, you look at adventures that come out, point-and-click adventures, and it's the same old cursor, it's the same old interface. Somebody pointed out that it's actually called the Broken Sword interface because back in 1996, what we did was very innovative.
Right.
And what's really exciting is we have the opportunity to innovate again. So if I could talk about both, if I may, if we talk first of all about Broken Sword 1 Reforged, yes, you can have the traditional mode. And that's fine. It's the same game, and except in 4K. And you can press a button, and it goes to 640, 400. And what I love doing, and I did this at GDC, I actually did this with Chris Charla at Microsoft, who's a fan of Broken Sword. And I showed him the new, and he went, yeah, I love this game, and I remember it. And then I pressed 1, and it went from the 4K to the 640, 400. And he, as everybody does, looked in absolute disbelief because, as you alluded to, everybody remembers in their mind one thing, and it wasn't what it was.
Right.
And then we also have the story mode, and this is very exciting because, first of all, the interface just feels funkier. It feels like a modern adventure. The HUD has a pyramid which moves around, and it shows both your options, and it just feels much more attractive to play. It feels more welcoming. And the other thing that we do is, which I'm super excited about, and is actually at the top of my mind because we're getting quite close to completion, is I don't want people to get frustrated. People love the idea that they are driving forward a narrative through solving puzzles. And this is why so many people play the games with a loved one, with a sibling, with a child, or with a parent, because there's this sort of sense of collaboration and solving the problems together and driving the story forward. Now, this is a very delicate balance because obviously what you want people to feel challenged, but you don't want them to get stuck and ultimately to have to look up the solution. Which, when we did Broken Sword Director's Cut a few years ago, we actually put, hints into the game.
Right.
Maybe other people had, maybe they hadn't, but it allowed people, and we thought it was, super innovative. But the problem is the moment you do that, and the same with Monkey Island, Return to Monkey Island, you're taken out of the game and you don't feel smart anymore. So what we did do in story mode is we encourage people to put on an auto hint, which after a certain, and they can turn it off or they can adjust it, but after a certain amount of time, when we think that they're getting stuck because of the way they're playing, because of the time, we give just a gentle hint. Why don't you look over here? Why don't you look over here? And over time, that becomes, more defined, because what I really, really want is for nobody to ever have to, or nobody playing story mode, to ever have to go and look up the hints, because I want people to feel smart, because that's one of the reasons why people love adventure games. And our audience, and I know that I would say this anyway, our audiences are smart, because if they weren't smart, they'd be playing a different genre of game. So,
Yes.
we want to keep them feeling smart, feeling smart.
Yeah. So how do you approach that then with a new game as well, right? Like, how do you sort of, in a way, do you feel like you're sort of satisfying the nostalgia crowd a little bit more Reforged, and that allows you to maybe go a little bit more off script on the new game?
Yes. And with Beyond the Steel Sky, which was the last game that we wrote, which is a sequel to a game that we wrote in 1994 with comic book artist Dave Giddens. It was such a long time ago. But it's lovely to sort of work with these people again, even though, an eternity has passed. And with Beyond the Steel Sky, I love the idea of being able to hack into the world and to see the way, like the Internet of Things. And in this world, everybody believes that the computer must be right. So when you hack the system and get it to do ludicrous things, that is when the humor comes because of the ludicrousness of the situation. And I felt very passionately in that game, as I do for all our future adventures, that actually having this repeated gameplay mechanic that is absolutely embedded into the game itself. It's not a mini game. Right. It is something that actually is at the spine, the core of the story. It's at the core of the gameplay, and we hang the gameplay around that. So it is still very much an adventure in the way that Beyond the Steel Sky was very much an adventure. But there's this sense that actually there's more to it than just simply find this object, use this object on whatever. It is still, I mean, some people are going to shout and scream and go, well, it's not an adventure anymore. It's still a point-and-click adventure, but it's a point-and-click adventure for the 21st century, for 2024. And as such, we will, I am sure, bring people along because it is the same experience, but better. The other thing is that from a visual perspective, people love the 2D look. And in particular, when we wrote the first two Broken Sword games, the layout artists came from Ballyfermot College in Dublin.
Oh, really?
which I'd read in Edge magazine that there were some extraordinary animators being trained at this college because it was the feeder school for the Don Bluth Studios, which was very successful at the time. So I went to visit them, and this gentleman called Owen Cahill met me, and he asked me if he could see some of what we were working on. I showed him, and he kind of said, "That's really not very good, the layouts." And I said, "Well, it's all right, isn't it?" He went, "May I show you what I do?" And this is a man with a lifetime of experience of drawing, of kind of really understanding the way that perspective can be bent for effect. And I owe many people a great debt of gratitude, but certainly Owen is right up there. He was like an absolute terrier. He completely broke this idea. Why do you keep drawing squares within squares? Well, yeah, no, it looks boring. This is what we need to do. And he'd phone up and talk for hours on the phone. And there was one particular moment where he said, "Why don't we change the angle of the camera?" And I said, "Owen, you can't do that. The sprites are all drawn at the same." He said, and he just talked and talked and talked. And in the end, he convinced me to give it a go. And he sent us two layouts at different angles. And blow me, he was absolutely right. He just instinctively knew. So what he was doing was he knew how to move the camera. He would draw, there's a Ferrari scene in Broken Sword. And what happens is the whole camera, you're scrolling the image across, but what he's doing is he's completely rotating it because he could. And what is lovely about that is that when you see this, you know that you're in the hands of somebody who really understands perspective. And because of that, it is more beautiful in almost every way than if we'd done it using 3D.
Broken Sword, The Shadow of the Templars came out in 1996. In it you play as George Stobbard, an American patent lawyer, and Nico Collard, a French journalist. The two pair up to uncover mysteries surrounding ancient institutions like the Knights Templar and Catholic Church. Shadow of the Templars is the version that's getting a remaster around the time this podcast comes out. The sequel was released a year later, but it wasn't until 2003 that the third game came out, followed by the fourth 3 years after that. an entirely different era for gaming. Broken Sword 5: The Serpent's Curse was released in 2013, and it'll have been well over a decade between that and the 6th game coming out, which is currently being worked on. These games were made in very different eras of game design, but first I want to talk about that initial move from 2 dimensions to 3. So many game studios struggled with this transition, so how did Revolution Software handle it? And how did it fundamentally change the series? How do you, I guess, manage then that transition to 3D, especially in the modern era? Because it sort of was forced upon the entire industry in the late 90s and early aughts, and a lot of studios in the UK, I especially remember a lot of my favorite like Amiga developers didn't make that transition, and then there's some famous ones who did, like, you know, Psygnosis arguably had more success in 3D on PS1 than they had done on Amiga prior to that. You guys obviously had a bunch of games, including like In Cold Blood, I think might have been the first 3D game maybe that you guys worked on. How tricky was that? Because to me that seems like, you know, getting a director to do a theater production or something. It's like a very different set of skills. There's some shared skills, but you know, you sort of have to retool your entire team for it.
Commercially, it was vital too, because, you know, back in the 2000, when we're talking about, or 2002 to 2003, retail was still absolutely dominant, and so a game had to be commissioned by a publisher, and the publisher then had to ship it into retail. There was no other way to get to market. So Broken Sword 3 was always going to be 3D, because that's what the publishers and the retailers wanted. And what we were very keen to do was to make sure that, because it was 3D, it would have 3D puzzles. It wouldn't just be a 2D brought to 3D. So right from the very beginning of Broken Sword 3, you come onto a cliff, you have a puzzle where the plane dips down. It looks, I think, fantastic, because you see the whole landscape going up and down. And these are all things that wouldn't have been possible except in 3D. And you've been very generous in what you say about maybe the puzzles maturing slightly, but certainly our absolute number one goal was not to write a 2D in 3D, because we felt there was so much that we could benefit from 3D. Now, whether we succeeded, obviously, is for others to decide. But there is no doubt that we wanted to be more ambitious, both from a gameplay perspective, a puzzle perspective, and also from a cinematography perspective.
Right.
Because that is what 3D brought us. And we'd waited, as I say, with Gabriel Knight, which was very, very early. They had fallen into a bit of a trap in that, there was no way that the 3D would look anywhere near as good as 2D. We waited a few years, brought Broken Sword 3 out when video cards were much faster. And I would like to think that we defined our own style. For this one, we did use a rendering engine called Renderware. So we didn't have to design it all from scratch. What we focused on was art that used Renderware to make the game look and feel different. So it still had that very rich 2D look, but in 3D. I mean, it looked 3D, but in a sort of unique and a different way. With In Cold Blood, it was super complicated because we didn't have an engine in the way that we did later for Broken Swords 3 and 4, which was Renderware.
Right.
And Renderware was a rendering engine, and the beginning of the extraordinary engines that you have now, whether it be Unity or Unreal. And so the skill set that was needed back in those days was extraordinary, and we just had some brilliant programmers who gave absolutely everything. There was a lot of excitement about moving to 3D, but a lot of people say they love In Cold Blood, and that's wonderful. I think we kind of screwed it up for exactly the reasons that you said. It was just so complicated in comparison, and it's a different discipline. And certainly what we did is we pre-rendered the backgrounds, which made a big difference. That made, Gabriel Knight 3 was coming out at around about that time, and very much fell victim, I think, to the fact that the 3D was not ready. And the whole point about adventure games is that, or one of the points about adventure games is that the emotion of the characters and conveying that is so important. And arguably 2D is still better, but certainly in back in those days, to do it in 3D in real time, there were many fast-moving visceral games, but they were all about twitch controls and imagining an extraordinary world. Adventures, it took a long time for 3D to really catch up and to mimic 2D. But certainly for Broken Sword 6, what we're aiming to do is get the best of every world. One of the things that our earlier games did, 2D games and Broken Sword 5 as well, is have multiple layers, all of which moved parallax next to each other. And what was exciting about that was that those layers were all hand-drawn. And the player instinctively knows that it's 2D rather than 3D. What we're doing for Broken Sword 6, which is super exciting, is still drawing those 2D layers, but we're applying them to 3D at different angles. So that as the camera moves, you get this extraordinary dynamics of what looks like 2D moving in a really exciting, dynamic way. And we put out a demo for that about a year ago, actually. And there was a lot of excitement because it does look absolutely fantastic. It looks every bit as good as a 2D game, except it's got the benefits of 3D. So after all of these years, now we're able to sort of reverse it and get the best of both worlds. It's just a great look, I think.
It's a funny thing that the art in adventure. I mean, art is important in every game to some extent. But I interviewed another adventure game developer a couple of years back, and they said something I found funny, which is, a lot of games, when you play them, you get rewarded. The player gets rewarded with items or unlocks or XP, and in adventure games, we're rewarding them with new art. We're basically giving them a new nice thing to look at. How much would you agree with that? And how much do you think is it you're rewarding them with good story?
I think when you talk to adventure fans, they say it's all about the story, that the puzzles are very secondary. And that makes perfect sense, because I think what the excitement is the challenge. In film theory, they talk about the idea that there is a route, and there is an expectation, but then you push back and put the protagonist under pressure, and they have to take a more dangerous route, and then you keep blocking them until eventually they find a route where they've taken a great deal of personal jeopardy. And in many ways, adventures are the same, because in a good adventure, you should know what the objective is, but you don't know what the solution to get there is. And this is a really fine balance, because I think the moment people don't know what their objective is, then they become incredibly confused. You want to know what to do, just not how to do it. So certainly from talking to people, the story is the primary driver. The puzzles and the art then support that. But and I would say this, but our puzzles, we've worked very hard always to make sure that the logic makes sense within the context of the motivations of the characters and the world at that time. So the art, the story, and the puzzles are all absolutely integrated, and that is what people love in an adventure game. But ultimately, it's the art and the puzzles supporting the story.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about puzzle design, because there's also been like a great evolution, especially in the Broken Sword series. Like those early games were maybe resting a bit more on the art and the story, and they had puzzles in it that were compelling. But when you guys started in 3 and 4 and 5, like you started to, I always wondered, like, is that a byproduct of making these games a lot, that you sort of get more confident about pushing, maybe trusting the player a bit more with puzzle design? Because I found those puzzles to be more involving and sort of more daring a lot in the further the series went on.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I think we changed the approach in some ways, but kept it the same in others. What we started with Beyond the Steel Sky, one of the key things was that I didn't want silly objects that were used haphazardly. If you found a battery you would know that you would use that battery on something. If you found a piece of explosive, you knew that if you could get an electrical charge through it, it would detonate. So that was rule number one was any object that you find and you can pick up will have a use. That is obvious once you come across it. Now, that is an antithesis really to an adventure game, because adventure games often rely on the fact that you've got to use, well, God help you, you've got to use a monkey with a banana to create a monkey wrench, which you then use to turn a nut, which allows a dam to open. The point is that a lot of these puzzles are wonderfully fun, but they are rewarding you retrospectively.
Right.
When you find that you've got to get a bit of sellotape and the cat, and you've got to put, your moustache on. These are great puzzles, but they would be impossible to solve if you thought logically. So to create a sense of a juxtaposition with gameplay that actually would challenge you in an interesting way, I was super keen on the idea of Link, which we brought forward from Beneath the Steel Sky. And Link created this very interesting puzzle, which I'm very proud of, from Beneath the Steel Sky. There's a big Yorkshire factory owner called Gilbert Lamb. And I think it's very unfair, because I live in Yorkshire. I think it's very unfair that, all the silly people are Yorkshire. Anyway, He had a cat that he liked to feed, and because he was very, high status, he would swipe his card in the elevator and go down. And what you could do as the player is actually hack into Link, take away his privileges, and transfer them to yourself, so that his card no longer worked. He gave it to you, which allowed you to go down, and that obviously moved the gameplay forward.
By the way, Couscous likes to be pampered. Like all women, hey lad?
So what Beyond the Steel Sky was about was really, as we always try and do, just pushing the boundaries of what an adventure could be by, yes, having inventory objects that you collect, but they are all clear on what their function would be. The idea of being able to link hack, go in and, like Scratch, the wonderful children's language Scratch, you could actually move blocks around. So the example that happens right at the very beginning is that there's a vending machine, and it's very logical. You put your hand, do you have authority? If yes, dispense a can of what we call spankles. If you try and push the machine, yes, it detects that it's being pushed, set an alarm off, a robot comes. So what we could then allow you to do using the Scratch-like language is actually change it so that if somebody who had a legitimate, instead of it dispensing, it would then set the alarm off. And what that opened up this wonderful idea of a world in which you could subvert the internal logic of the world. And because the characters believed that anything that the computer did must be correct, they would then react in a ludicrous way. And that was where the humor came. But it also allowed us to drive forward the puzzles themselves. One of the regrets I have is that we didn't make more of that, because that offered a wonderful opportunity to juxtapose the point-and-click gameplay with supporting gameplay, which is still very much in the style of point and click, but it offered a different dimension, which I think worked very well.
Yeah, it's almost like adding a sort of a simulation layer to these worlds that are otherwise very deferential to the player. Very like you've entered a room, solved this room, leave this room. It added a sort of an immersion and a dynamicness to those worlds that was sort of lacking in most of the genre, I feel like. So is that something that you think you guys are going to keep sort of moving in that direction with the new Broken Sword?
Yeah, very much so. For obviously looking for games like Broken Sword 1, that will be very respectful for the game as it was. Any speech was canon, so we're not going to change any of the speech. That's set in stone, and that's what it was. And hopefully
the goat's going to be there.
Oh, the goat's going to be there. We can talk about the goat in a moment, actually. But then for future Broken Sword games, the commonality across them all will be the interface. So the new interface that we're doing, and the point and click, so you can either play traditional or story, and we will offer both. But the continuity, which I really excite, is having a user interface that is very simple, that runs across our old games and our new games, and that's very much the plan.
Broken Sword is predominantly recognized as a PC franchise, but one of the key to Revolution Software's success has been not being scared of new platforms, be it the Nintendo DS, smartphones, or exciting new consoles that are basically being sold on their incredible 3D graphics.
When we wrote Broken Sword 3 in 3D, and I don't regret it, but it was very much a commercial decision because no publisher was going to touch a 2D adventure. Right. The publishers were absolutely clear. Well, there were two things. There were many things that they said, but one is point and click is dead. And the second they said is that the PC is dead as a games machine.
Oh, right. Because this is like 2003, 4, right?
But before then.
Even
before
earlier.
Then. Yeah. So when we wrote Broken Sword 1, I had met somebody who'd phoned me up and asked me if he said that he was working for Sony, and that there was a new console that was dead secret. This would have been about 1992 or 3. That was dead secret, and would I like to come along and look at it? And obviously I was quite flattered, because in those days other console manufacturers would never reach out to indie developers. And he said one of our remits is to get indie developers to support our console, which of course was the PSX, which of course was the PlayStation. But when we finished the first Broken Sword, or as we were finishing it, I approached PlayStation, because our publisher, Virgin Interactive, had made it clear they had no interest, because they were absolutely convinced that it would be of no interest to a PlayStation audience who wanted visceral 3D games. So we kind of went with a begging bowl to PlayStation. And they weren't enormously excited, I have to say, but they did agree to publish it, which was great. And even gave us a little bit of money to port it across. And we finished it. And the official PlayStation magazine, which was the biggest games magazine in the world by far, it had a circulation of 500,000. Wow. Got it and gave it extended reviews. I think it was 7, 8, 9, 10 pages, 9 out of 10. But also, really importantly, cover mounted. Put it on a cover mount. And in those days, the magazines cost £5, and which was a lot, and so generally the kids could only afford one magazine, and so they would play the cover mount again and again and again. And so literally, because of the German one and the French one and the Australian one, all of which cover mounted the game, literally millions of people got to play the game, which was quite extraordinary. And a large number of the people who are now in their sort of 30s, 40s and 50s actually discovered the game on the front cover of the official PlayStation magazine.
That's amazing. OPM. And I bet they gave you that extended review as well, because in a way 3D games didn't screenshot very well for a long time. Like, some of them did, like, Wipeout maybe looked really good when you hit pause on it, but a lot of games didn't necessarily. So I wonder if having a particularly, gorgeous 2D game also was in your favor in that respect.
Well, I think to an extent. Also, though, you might say that the publishers were so obsessed with the fact that it had to be 3D and visceral that we had very little competition. I mean, nobody else was doing 2D games.
The only one I can think of is, do you remember Vib Ribbon?
I do.
It was like a black and white. It was developed in Japan. It was like a rhythm game, I think. It was a stick figure bunny rabbit that would.
Yeah, the rabbit. Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So I don't know.
No, I remember very well, but that was all later, and the one where the ball goes and it just picks up everything and gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Katamari or Cooler World or something, or
exactly. Yes, Katamari Damacy.
Yes.
But that's all much later. So bearing in mind that the game came out in 1996 and the PlayStation really had only been out, a year. It gave us the opportunity to have our games on that platform very, very early. And it was a gas, because PlayStation had become the really sexy brand. What happened was that, as you know, games were sold at retail. Retail had a limited number of slots on their shelves, and PlayStation became more and more dominant, and that drove PC out, and ultimately led Sega and the wonderful Dreamcast to go out of business. And so as PlayStation came to dominate and PC fell back, there was very little scope for PC games, and also publishers were, as I say, were saying that the PC was dead as a platform. PC boxes for a time were sort of in the back, getting dusty, while PlayStation was first and foremost. But that did mean that, if we were a major PlayStation game, then that was, a fantastic place to be. And the official PlayStation magazine actually did a review about 6 months, or about a year later, 2 years later. And extraordinarily, Broken Sword 2 came in as the 5th best PlayStation game ever. And Broken Sword 1 came in at the 10th best PlayStation game.
Wow.
We beat some of the Tomb Raiders. We beat Resident Evil. I mean, it was ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. But that was the level of passion that immediately sort of emerged, or very quickly emerged, in the PlayStation, because they weren't just generic young men who wanted visceral 3D games. They were a broad range of people, and they wanted a broad range of games. And I think actually PlayStation learned an awful lot from the success of Broken Sword on their platform.
In a way, like, we're talking about PlayStation 1 games, Resident Evil, the first one especially, was very puzzly. You know what I mean? The second game was a lot more bombastic, sort of similar to Tomb Raider 1 and 2. That early game, it was a lot of environmental puzzles back and forth, that type of stuff. Probably what you're speaking to actually was a lot of 2D puzzles in 3D actually in that first Resident Evil. They had a couple of ones that sort of were about moving objects, but largely it was about going from A to B. To that point, was there ever a desire or pressure from a publisher to maybe lean into some more things that happen in 3D, like shooting or, combat of any case? Because obviously in In Cold Blood, you did have stealth sequences and stuff like that. I feel like tonally, it probably wouldn't work as well in Broken Sword, but was there ever any pressure to do that, to push the game in a way in which, a publisher might, to sort of tick a demographic box or something?
Yeah, I would say that what we did right or wrong, particularly what we did wrong, I can't blame anybody but myself. But I would say that we were absolutely battered by the forces of the market at that time. And in 2000, things were very, very grim. I mean, it's a bit like the way things have become grim now. We've had a cycle. But in 2000, an enormous number of developers were going bankrupt. What had happened was that we'd had some really strong British developers like Psygnosis, like Ocean, a few years earlier before that, US Gold. And they, one by one, they sold to foreign competitors. So by the end of the 90s, we didn't really have, apart from Codemasters, we didn't have any British developers. So when there was a recession, then the big American, French, and Japanese obviously pulled back to their home territories, leaving the UK developers very, very, very exposed. And what a lot of developers did, and to an extent we did a little bit, was start doing work for hire because it was just so much easier. And what nearly happened was that if you think of the games that we created, I mean, everybody knows that GTA was developed in Scotland. Everybody knows that Tomb Raider was in Derby, or indeed Broken Sword in York, or Worms in Wakefield, or just a million and one great British games or global games that happened to be from Britain. What was really worrying was that for a few years, there was this sense that actually British developers were going to move to work for hire and not create original IP. And clearly creating original IP was what we had done so well for 20 years up until that point. And it was all looking really grim. Basically, Broken Sword 3, our publisher, THQ, made about $2 to $3 million profit. We made a £200,000 loss. That is very, very bad business. And then we did the same with Broken Sword 4. But we did it because we kind of had to. That was the model. That was the only way we were going to get any deal whatsoever. So at the end of Broken Sword 4, we mothballed the company. I mean, we didn't go bankrupt, but we had quite an overdraft. And then it all changed in about 2007 with a call from a gentleman called Paul Burford from Apple.
Right.
And I don't know how he knew our number, but anyway, he phoned up and he said, I work for Apple. We have this new phone called the iPhone. We sort of said, yeah, I know. And he said, we think your games would work really well on our device. We produced a game called Broken Sword. Not in a million years would I have thought that actually we'd ever see it again. We're about to release it on iPhone in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. It looks great. What had dominated up until that point at retail were the AAAs and then the fillers, which cost $10, $15, $20 million, $100 million, $20 million, and there was no room at all for innovative indie games. What happened suddenly was that the market changed with digital, where the AAAs did well, the indie games did well, and everything that was filler went just disappeared. And THQ, which had been the biggest publisher in the world when they published Broken Sword,
right,
were bankrupt in 3 years because their whole market, their whole business strategy had been to produce these filler games, which no longer survived because actually what the audience wanted was AAA or indie games.
Right.
They didn't want the stuff that actually went in the middle. And the same thing's happened in television. It's all AAA or indie, super indie. It's a huge change that's happened over the last 20 years.
I did want to talk about the iOS stuff, especially because I was born in '86 and I was a little bit too young to play Beneath the Steel Sky when it first came out. So the first time I played it was with that fantastic iOS version that you guys did. How did you find that process? Because that also involves, basically figuring out the UI problem all over again.
Well, actually, what happened was a group of fans put out a survey which turned into a petition demanding that we write Broken Sword on the Nintendo DS.
All right.
And do you know what? That makes, for publishers, that gives them a lot of comfort. So we got hold of Ubisoft and said, look, we've had this petition, and actually we think it's a good idea. And Ubisoft commissioned the DS version of Broken Sword and then asked us to add new content. And I have to say, they were just a fantastic partner. Absolutely brilliant. And we worked very closely with them, but part of that involved, sitting with their producers and actually exploring how we could bring the interface across to touchscreen with, of course, the stylus. And broadly, the game was very well reviewed. And that was one of the reasons why Apple approached us, because they'd seen the game on DS. The first game that we did was Beneath the Steel Sky, just because that was going to be less ambitious. Also because the screen resolution at the time was, Beneath the Steel Sky was 320 by 200, which was roughly the resolution of the iPhone at that first generation of iPhone. We were extraordinarily lucky. And so the game came out and was very successful, and you've been very kind about enjoying it. But we had a huge head start in that we'd worked before the iPhone even existed. We'd had a big head start in really working out how a touchscreen might work. So we then I really wanted to beat Monkey Island out, and it's clear that they were working. They'd announced that they were working on a touchscreen iOS version. And so we kind of really rushed to get it out. And we'd learned quite a lot from Beyond the Steel Sky. And we did beat them.
Beneath this.
Broken Sword beat Monkey Island.
Yeah.
And then when Monkey Island came out, it turned out that they'd spent all their money on changing the art style. And we had no money, but we'd put our heart and soul into the interface. And from the way it was reviewed, Broken Sword still has a Metacritic of, I think, 92 or 93% on the iOS. And Monkey Island is considerably lower than that. Monkey Island is a great, great, great game. I'm not knocking it. But it was such a big mistake to change the art style for no really good reason. Because ultimately what people want is the same but better. You know, they don't want it to change. And unless there's a good reason to change, you shouldn't change it.
Beneath the Steel Sky is another Revolution Software classic, a collaboration between the studio and comic book artist Dave Gibbons, most famous for his work on Watchmen in 2000 AD. It takes place in a 1984-style world, combining traditional adventure game mechanics with more interactive puzzle elements. The sequel, 2020's Beyond the Steel Sky, brought the band back together. So what was it like working with Dave Gibbons again? And how has kickstarting these types of projects helped fund what are ultimately, in 2024, titles in a niche video game genre? What would you say you've learned the most from Beyond the Steel Sky? What were the things in which, the ways in which it sort of was, maybe production worked the way you would have thought, and what lessons do you take into other games? Because that's sort of again, it's 3D, but it's like 10 years removed from those Broken Sword 3D games, right?
Yeah. And we used Unreal, which was, you know, an absolutely awesome engine. And it was great to team up with Dave. He had drawn a few comics. He drew the comic for Broken Sword 1 and Broken Sword 2 and Broken Sword 5, and had done and we'd sort of kept in touch. And he kind of asked me about whether we should do another Beneath the Steel Sky. And after Broken Sword 5, it just felt like the time was right. And it was an absolute pleasure working with him. When we worked with him first time around, he'd just finished Watchmen. He was an absolute superstar. And he was really excited to write games. And Dave, I think, always had an affection for Beneath the Steel Sky because, you know, we keep talking about, you know, doing the next one. And it just felt right. And he got involved with every aspect. Apart from the gameplay, he said, I know nothing about the gameplay, but I'd love to read the story. I'd love to, you know, obviously contribute enormously to the art style. We had two art directors. The other one was a very, very talented 3D artist called Sucha Singh. And Sucha and Dave worked really closely together, had enormous mutual admiration. And basically Dave would imagine it and Sucha would build it and then add his own imagination. And it just worked really, really well. And meanwhile, of course, Dave was becoming very, very famous again because HBO was producing at that point, just about to launch, the TV series of Watchmen. And I remember so well, we went to New York Comic Con to do some promotion for Beyond a Steel Sky. And we had dinner in a fairly cheap, grotty place in Times Square. And we came out and all the digital advert boards had got Watchmen. It was, you know, I wasn't sure whether to be more impressed or more jealous. I was certainly both. But no, it was absolutely brilliant. And, you know, once again, it's the, you know, the absolute joy of collaborating and working closely with somebody whose opinion, you know, you really admire. Of course, we argued all the time. But ultimately, it's working with somebody who you know that they're super smart. And if they are holding on to an idea, there is a good reason to hang on to that idea. And so you kind of work to explore why, what is it that you like that I can't see, and vice versa. And ultimately, you get the best result from this sort of collaboration, I think. Yeah. But so it was a great reminder of how fun it was to work with Dave again.
I think maybe like this isn't me blowing smoke up your arse. I think there's something about the name of, I think Lure of the Temptress might be like my favorite named game ever. I don't know what it is about it. It's just like it's like it flows well. It's so inquisitive, especially maybe as a young man. I was probably also like, ooh, the Lure of the Temptress, you say.
And the artwork.
And the artwork as well, absolutely. Yes, it lends itself to that. I mean, Beneath the Steel Sky similarly is very, you know, evocative and you know, especially if you're, you know, when I was young and not used to that type of dystopic sci-fi stuff, it was like, Jesus, what's going on here?
Can I tell you the story of how Lure of the Temptress got its name?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So we were working with a company called Mirrorsoft. And Mirrorsoft was the Daily Mirror. It was owned by a gentleman called Robert Maxwell.
Right.
Father to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Right. Okay. Wow.
And he was, you're too young, you won't remember this, but we're talking about the early 90s. And he was aboard his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine.
Oh my God.
And either was fell off or was pushed off or jumped off, or was it the CIA that got him, or Mossad, or the Russians? Because he was a Czech that was considered to be a spy. I mean, it was all full of incredible intrigue. Anyway, he died. This is irrelevant to the story, except that we were working for Mirrorsoft. And the game that was to become Lure of the Temptress was coming to an end. And the head of marketing, Alison Beasley, phoned me up and said, right, we need to come up with some names. Can you come up with some names, please? So I came up with a load that were rather boring. And I knew they were rather boring. So at the bottom, I wrote Lure of the Temptress. And then I put in brackets, we can't really call it that. And faxed it back. And of course, she came back and said, we love Lure of the Temptress. That has to be the game's name. And I said, Alison, there are two problems with that game name. And what are they? She said, yeah, well, the first one is there's no luring. And secondly, there's no temptress. And do you know what she said? She said, and I promise you, she said, can you put one in? So we were nearly finished. We were nearly finished this game. And we had to completely rewrite it to fit a game name that marketing liked. And that taught me a very, very valuable lesson. For God's sake, don't put any idea into a marketing person's head unless you want them to grasp it. Because grasp it, they will. And they will have the power to do. But ultimately what happened then was that I said, well, we can do, but it'll take an extra 6 months. And she said, oh, well, we feel it's a bit small. So actually, it would work quite well. So we'll give you a bit more money. And the interesting thing is that had we published the game, because they also had the wonderful Bitmap brothers.
Yes.
And I think they might have had, Jops with Sensible.
Oh, right.
Yes, they did.
Yeah,
they had Sensible as well.
Right.
Or was that Virgin? But I mean, all of those great Brit developers were very much working either for Mirrorsoft and then later Virgin. But what happened was that they gave us a bit of money and 6 months. And in that 6 months, that was the time that Robert Maxwell was pushed or jumped off his yacht.
Right.
And we had a deal we had a contract that was pretty fierce with Mirrorsoft. When they signed the agreement with us, never in their wildest dreams did they believe that they would be the one in receivership. They assumed it would be us that went bankrupt. So we couldn't believe our luck. So we served notice on them due to their receivership, and there was not much they could do. But then retrospectively, a few months later, they'd been bought by Acclaim. And they sent the Bulldogs in, and Acclaim basically tried to claim that that the agreements couldn't have been terminated. Now, it was quite clear that it said you serve notice to the address in the recitals, and some of the developers had got it wrong. They'd served notice to the main office, whereas actually what you had to do was send it to this particular address, which we had done. So we got this very aggressive letter from Acclaim, basically saying we don't accept that it's been terminated, and we would like you to indicate whether you accept that you will work with us under our terms. And there was a big box for yes and a big box for no. And the big Bitmap brothers basically, and we of course went no and faxed it back. Am I allowed to swear or not?
Absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, good. The Bitmap brothers put a third box with fuck off on it. They ticked it and faxed it back. And that was such a cool thing to do. I wish I'd done that.
Knowing the Bitmap brothers, I'm not surprised.
No. And they were hugely successful at the time. So they could do that. We couldn't. We didn't have the the finances or anything. But what a great thing to do. What a great thing to do.
you're coming down the pipe. It seems like on Reforged, right? It's going to come out in the next little while, next couple of months or so, and then
in the next couple of months. Yep.
Terrific, and then it'll be 2025 or beyond for 6, right?
Yeah. No, 6. But basically, to answer, continue an answer to a question here. The thing about adventure games is that they are very expensive to write. They're expensive because, as you said, the reward is artwork. The reward is unique animations. And we love writing adventures. We love our audience who are so passionate. But from a commercial perspective, we need to be very careful. And, Broken Sword 1 has been really well received. We did a fantastic Kickstarter. Everybody said Kickstarter is going to be, a lot of people say you shouldn't do a Kickstarter. It's not what it used to be. We actually earned more from this one than we did from Broken Sword 5 10 years ago.
Fantastic.
And that is testament to the fact that, we have a wonderful, wonderful community. But let's be absolutely clear. I mean, I think part of it is we do absolutely rely on the support from the community. Broken Sword 5, as I said, we were in absolutely dire straits, and Broken Sword 1 sold very well. Broken Sword 2, that gave us the confidence to start Broken Sword 5, because ultimately, I think it's really important that the developer takes the greatest risk to come up with a prototype to prove that it's, that the game is feasible, and to show the community what they'll be getting. And so for Broken Sword 5, we spent a lot coming up with a prototype, and then we kickstarted it. In those days, it had to be an American. You couldn't do it from Europe.
Oh, really?
So we actually had to set up a Revolution Software Inc. Based in Delaware. And actually, I'll tell you quite a fun story. You also needed an American bank account. And for that, you needed some sort of proof. And the money, we couldn't get a bank account in time. So it looked like we were going to miss it. So I had a word with my cousin who's based in America, and asked if we could put the money into her Amazon account. So she gave us her password, bless her. And she phoned me up and she said, $500,000 has gone in. You've got to get rid of it. Otherwise, I'm going to be in real trouble. You've got to get rid of it. You've got to get rid of it for tax. Yeah. So, I mean, bless her. I won't embarrass her by giving you her name. So for about a week, she had $500,000 in her Amazon account, which it swiftly found its way into Revolution Software Inc.'s. But then 10 years later, of course, Kickstarter, I mean, it is not as popular as it was for video games, but for us, as I say, it earned more than we had done for Broken Sword 5. And that was just for a physical version. Right. We weren't kickstarting the game. This is Broken Sword 1 Reforged. So it was extraordinarily successful. £620,000 because we did it as pounds, and then with late backers we're up to about 650,000. So we're very, very close to $1 million, and that is considerably more than we did for Broken Sword 5. And everybody told us that actually it wouldn't be anywhere near as successful. But it is because of our community, and
right.
We love them and they love us, and it's just great. It's lovely.
So how does that work then for 6? Because obviously, it's been a rough couple of years for people trying to get publisher money or any money, VC money, whatever it is. It's the purse strings have only gotten tighter in 2024 as well. Are you guys doing any community funding for that? Are you hoping that maybe some of the profits from Reforged will sort of help that project along as well?
Yeah, no, there's no money around at all, which obviously is very tough. But it also, there are always corrections. There was so much money sloshing around, 5 years ago. And it obviously couldn't last, and it didn't. So we are just very relaxed. We will make a profit for Broken Sword 1. As you say, we've already spent quite a lot getting a really nice prototype for Broken Sword 6. And we will just go gently. The only thing is that there's a lot of expectation and hope that we're going to do it soon. But from a funding perspective, these games, do cost a good number of millions of pounds or dollars. and from a funding perspective, we need to be very cautious because, what we're not prepared to do is jeopardize the company. And, what really terrifies me is the idea of taking lots of money from people and then not delivering, which, is just such an unfair thing to do. Although we wouldn't be the first.
No, you wouldn't. But perhaps it's that mentality that, has it so that you're celebrating your 35th anniversary of Revolution Software. So, you can't exactly, scoff at that mentality. Charles Cecil, thanks so much for talking to me. An absolute pleasure. And I'll see you, around Pier 32 in March. Well, I look fantastic in a pair of swimming shorts, honestly.
Do you? Well, I was going to say you look like a budgie smuggler man, actually. And if you were to wear those, but the only thing is that, let me warn you, it is quite cold. So you only come out half the man you were when you went in. Okay. So so those budgie smugglers wouldn't look quite so impressive. But at least the sharks would not mistake you for a seal. That's there is impressive. That advantage.
We'll take the photographs at the start, not when we come back. How about that?
Exactly.
Thanks so much to Charles for talking to me and to Jesse for producing this episode and every episode of Dear Dwyery. Shadows of the Templar Reforged is set to be released on September 18th, so it should be out by the time you listen to this. I'm recording this a few weeks ahead of time as we're filming loads of documentaries around the world ourselves this month. Hopefully not while being hunted by Knights Templar, which, I'm Catholic, so hopefully, I'm on their am I on their side? Maybe not. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back soon with another episode, and if you have any suggestions for interviewees or games, send me an email at podcast@noclip.video or spam me on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling that thing at Danny O'Dwyer. Until next time.